Hey, this is EynSof, and I'm excited to showcase something that I'm calling an atomic clock. Now, you may be wondering, okay, EynSof, clocks have been around in Minecraft for a really long time. What is it that makes this clock atomic? Well, the Oxford English Dictionary defines an atom as an extremely small amount of a thing or quality. The word comes from the Greek word atomos, which means indivisible. Since this clock is configurable to individual game ticks, which are the smallest unit of time in Minecraft, this clock is atomic. This is the base configuration of the atomic clock, and it's simply TitiSurMinecraft's hopper clock from over 10 years ago. Now, you may be more familiar with the Etho hopper clock. This one is similar, only it's completely silent. I think it's just a fantastic design, and I highly recommend you check out his video to learn more about it, if you haven't already. I'll leave a link in my video description. However, I do need to provide some explanation of how this works because it serves as the foundation for the atomic clock more generally. I have this clock configured such that when either of these redstone torches lights up, we get a pulse. So the clock's period, also called its cycle time, is defined as the time between when one of these torches lights up and when the other torch lights up. There's just one item in these lower hoppers that ping-pongs back and forth, spending one period in one hopper and the next period in the other hopper. And the location of the item in the lower hoppers determines which of these upper hoppers is locked, and that in turn determines the direction of flow of the items. The more items in these hoppers, the longer the period. Right now I have just 8 items in here, but you could have as many as 320. That's 5 stacks of 64 items. As far as the minimum, I'm going to strongly recommend having at least 3 items. I'll get into that more later. Now, the period of the clock in game ticks can be calculated from the number of items as follows. It's a number of items in the upper hoppers times 8 and then minus 2. Now, you might be curious about this minus 2. After all, hoppers operate at 8 game ticks, so why isn't it just the number of items times 8? Why do we need that minus 2? Well, the short answer is that when all of the items have emptied out of one hopper into the other hopper, it actually only takes 6 game ticks for the direction of flow to reverse and for that first item to make its way back into that empty hopper. So 6 game ticks instead of 8, hence the minus 2. Now, if that explanation isn't satisfying enough, that's okay. I'm going to provide a more detailed explanation later on in the video, so stay tuned for that. But either way, hopefully you can accept that we can only configure this clock in increments of 8 game ticks as we add or remove items from these hoppers. And that's fine for many applications of a clock, but we're talking about this being an atomic clock where we can define its period down to the specific game tick. And that's useful for certain things, certain precision devices, certain farms. An iron farm, for example, where depending on your version, you might want a clock of exactly 600 game ticks or 700 game ticks. So in its current form, we can't do that. But I had the idea that if we could take the pulse output from this clock and loop it around to these hoppers to lock them briefly, just long enough to add an offset ranging anywhere from +1 to +7 game ticks, then we could achieve any arbitrary period, right? So we could then add or remove items to adjust the clock in increments of 8, and then we could do the fine-tuning by adding +1 through +7. And so that's what I've done with these designs over here. Now, there are two designs because we need one for offsets of even game ticks, adding +2, +4, or +6 game ticks. And then we need this design for adding odd game ticks, +1, +3, +5, or +7. So let's see how these clocks work. So as you can see, when the clock pulses, that is observed by this observer, which then leads into two repeaters that then lock these upper hoppers. Now, this second repeater is set to 4 ticks, and that will always be the case. This first repeater after the observer is the one that we use to configure the amount of offset. So when set to 1 redstone tick, that provides a +2 game tick offset. At 2 ticks, we get a +4 game tick offset, and at 3 ticks, we get a +6 game tick offset. The odd game tick design is similar, only in order to achieve that odd game tick offset, we do need scaffolding and a trapdoor. So this one is not silent. Our other options would have been to use leaf blocks and logs, but that would have required a piston, which is even more noisy. However, pretty soon we're going to have an even better option, which is the copper bulb, and that one will be much more quiet. Now, like the even game tick design, this one has an observer to observe the scaffolding change, and it also leads into 2 repeaters. And like that other design, this second repeater is also set to 4 ticks and doesn't change. Once again, it's this first repeater that we adjust. Right now, it's set to 1 redstone tick, which gives us a +3 game tick offset. And we could set this to 2 ticks, which gives us +5 game ticks, or 3 ticks to get +7 game ticks. Now, to get the +1 game tick offset, we would just replace this repeater with a solid block. If you've made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. It really does make a big difference. Thanks. Hey, this is EynSof from the future, where I'm happy to report that the copper bulb does indeed provide that odd game tick offset that we're looking for that odd game tick clock. And I just have to say I am really pleased with how simple and quiet this design is. You can still hear it, but it's a lot more subtle than the scaffolding and trapdoor based approach. I've also verified that the repeaters are configured in exactly the same way as the other design for any given offset. To do so, I couldn't rely upon carpet mod as I usually do because it's just not available in the snapshot. So what I've done instead is I've paired up the copper bulb based design with the scaffolding and trapdoor based design. I've also reduced the number of items in the hoppers for both clocks, just so we have a faster clock for easier comparison. As you can see, both clocks are perfectly synchronized. And I've verified this for all the possible offsets. Right now it's on the first tick, which is that +3 game tick offset. We could move it to the third tick for a +7 game tick offset. And start it back up. And both clocks are still perfectly in sync. So there you have it. Another win for the copper bulb. One thing I'd like to call out is that each time the clock pulses, the observer actually fires twice. And the reason for that is the clock pulse is 6 game ticks in length, which is enough time for the observer to get off of cooldown. So it fires once on the rising edge of the pulse and a second time on the falling edge. Now, as I was working on these clocks, I stumbled upon some truly bizarre behaviors when repeaters are processing double pulses. And in particular, 2 repeaters back to back exhibit their own unique properties when processing double pulses as well. Not all of the time, just in certain configurations of repeater delays and spacings between the pulses. Now, I have to admit, I found these behaviors both disturbing and interesting, so I'll be creating a separate video to explore them in greater detail. However, I didn't want these clocks to rely upon those strange behaviors at all. For one thing, because I just found them to be really unintuitive. And also, I wanted these clocks to be resilient. And just in case Mojang were to decide that these behaviors were really undesirable and should be removed, I didn't want these clocks to be impacted by that. So rest assured, these clocks don't involve those behaviors. Those second pulses are just swallowed harmlessly without impacting the delays at all. You may be wondering, why do we even have this observer in the even game tick configuration? The odd game tick configuration needs the observer in order to achieve the odd game tick offsets. But that's not true for the even game tick clock. So why don't we do something like this instead? Of course, we'd have to recalibrate the repeater delays in order to achieve the offsets that we're looking for, but this can work. In fact, this was my original design. But I ended up moving away from this because I wanted this clock to have an on-off switch, and this design suffers from a problem where if you turn off the clock at just the wrong time, like that, the clock gets locked and there's nothing you can do with the lever to unlock it. You end up having to break the circuit and then restoring it. Now that's not an issue with the observer-based design. Another side benefit of having the observer is it allows for both the even and odd game tick configurations to have a lot more parallel construction so that they only differ on the very end of the clock. And it also allows for the way that you configure the clock to be a lot more consistent with this first repeater delay. I put together this table to help communicate how to configure the atomic clock to any given period in terms of game ticks. Here, the number sign is for the number of items to go in the upper hoppers, where that's calculated as the period plus 2 div 8, where div just means to divide and then drop the remainder. The delta sign is for the offset, where that's calculated as the period plus 2 mod 8. And mod stands for modulo, which just means you divide and then just keep the remainder. Config is referring to which configuration of the atomic clock, whether it's the base configuration by TitiSurMinecraft or the odd or even game tick variants that I've presented here. R1 and R2 refer to the first or second repeater after the observer, and the number just refers to which redstone tick setting to set that repeater on. And you'll notice that the second repeater should just always be set to 4 redstone ticks. I just have it here to be explicit. So let's just go through a few of these examples to better understand how this works. Let's say you want a 22 game tick clock. Well, 22 plus 2 is 24, and 8 goes into 24 3 times with no remainder. And whenever there's no remainder, we're just going to use that base configuration by TitiSurMinecraft. But let's say we want a 23 game tick clock. 23 plus 2 is 25. 8 goes into 25 3 times with a remainder of 1. 1 is, of course, an odd number, so we're going to use that odd game tick configuration. And that first repeater setting, well, repeaters can't be set to 0. So in this case, we're just going to swap out that first repeater for any solid block. And let's say we want a 24 game tick clock. Well, 24 plus 2 is 26. 8 goes into 26 3 times with a remainder of 2. 2 is an even number, so we're going to use that even game tick configuration, and that first repeater is going to be set to 1 redstone tick. Now you can see that this just continues to follow an easy to follow pattern, alternating between odd and even configurations until we get down to that base configuration again. And that comes up every 8 configurations, right? 30 is 8 more than 22. And so we can just use the same configuration as we had for 22, only we add one more item. And the first repeater also follows an easy to follow pattern, right? 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. So this cycle of 8 just keeps repeating all the way up to the maximum value of 2,565 game ticks, which equates to 2 minutes and 8¼ seconds. Now that would be configured with the maximum value of 320 items, and there would be an offset of 7, that's the odd game tick configuration, and that first repeater would be set to 3 redstone ticks. Now, as far as the minimum configuration, I'm going to strongly recommend we just consider 22 game ticks, that minimum, with 3 items. Now, technically speaking, TitiSurMinecraft's design can work with just 2 items. However, those even and odd variants sometimes malfunction for certain offsets with only 2 items in it. So that's why I recommend a minimum of 3 items and 22 game ticks as that minimum. Now, if you do need shorter periods on your clocks, I have put together a bunch of other designs to get you to those lower periods. These are the even game tick designs, and here are the odd game tick designs. And so they range from 4 game ticks on up to 6, 8, all the way up to 20 game ticks. I don't even know who to attribute this design to. This, I feel like, has been in the community forever. And then here are the odd game tick designs. This is the 5 game tick design, and I first saw this in an Il Mango video. I then just extended this to 7, 9, etc. on up to 21 game ticks. Now, you could extend these to longer periods as well. It's just they don't scale very well, right? You're just going to have to keep adding more and more observers for the odd game tick design and more repeaters for the even game tick design. And that's where this atomic clock just really shines, right? It's just scales really well. You just have to add more items and then configure the repeaters. I also put together a Google Sheet that has this table in it, only it's been filled out comprehensively for every possible period ranging from 22 game ticks all the way to the maximum of 25, 65. So you could use that sheet to just look up whatever period you're interested in and find the corresponding configuration. Let's revisit why the period in game ticks is equal to the number of items in these upper hoppers times 8 and then minus 2. In particular, why do we have that minus 2? Previously, I explained that this is because when all of the items have moved into just one of the hoppers, that very first item, when it comes back, takes 6 game ticks instead of 8. But let's take a closer look to understand more clearly why that is the case. We can do so by using carpet mod to freeze time. So I'm going to step through time here to the point when all of the items have made their way into just one of these hoppers. So I'm just going one tick at a time now so that we can get right down to the exact game tick. So it's right here. All 8 of the items are in this hopper. So all the items are in the near hopper. The far hopper is empty. The comparator on it hasn't yet had a chance to update. And the item in the lower hoppers is in the far hopper. The close hopper is empty. Now let's see what happens as we increment through time. So 1 game tick and 2, the comparator has turned off, unlocking that far hopper, and that far hopper no longer has the item. It's already pushed its item into the near hopper. So how could that be, right? Hoppers operate at 8 game ticks, and yet this has happened instantly. The reason is because that 8 game ticks is actually a cooldown, and while the hopper was locked, that cooldown had already expired. So as soon as that hopper was unlocked, that item transferred instantly. Now that that item has moved, these comparators are going to update. They just need 2 more game ticks. So here's 3 and 4 game ticks. And now 5 and 6, and the torches have updated as well. Now, what we'll see is that first item has already moved out to that other hopper. And this is for the same reason as we just discussed. The cooldown on the hopper had already expired while the hopper was locked. So as soon as this hopper was unlocked, the item moved instantly over. So you can see that in 2, 4, 6 game ticks, that first item has already moved over to the other hopper. Now the rest of the items will continue to move at 8 game ticks per item because these are still governed by the hopper cooldown. Hopefully that explains why we need to subtract 2, because it's 6 game ticks instead of 8 for that very first item. Well, there you have it, the atomic clock. A general purpose clock with precision down to individual game ticks that's completely silent for even game tick periods and very nearly so for odd game tick periods once we have access to the copper bulb. Please remember to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this content. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.